In 1976, a Russian-born American named Zecharia Sitchin published a book that rewrote 5,000 years of history with a single photograph. On page after page of the 12th planet, he presented an ancient Akkadian cylinder seal, a small stone carved nearly 5,000 years ago, showing what he said was the sun surrounded by 11 globes. The Sumerians, he argued, knew something we had only recently rediscovered, that our solar system contains more than the planets visible to the naked eye. They knew because visitors from that hidden world had told them. The book sold millions of copies in more than 25 languages. It planted an idea that refuses to die, that somewhere beyond Neptune, a massive planet swings through the dark on a long, stretch of orbit, and one day it will return. When it does, we will not survive the encounter. The curious part is not that the claim is wrong, astronomers dismissed it immediately, but that the dismissal made no difference. The panic has returned on fresh dates every few years since. In 2003, a woman who said beings from another world implanted a communication device in her brain predicted the planet would trigger a pole shift and destroy most of humanity in May. When May came and went, she said the date had been a deliberate lie to protect us from martial law, and that the planet had already arrived but was sitting motionless behind the sun. In 2012, the panic fused with the end of a Maya calendar cycle. Millions of people braced for impact on December 21st. In 2017, a Christian numerologist calculated a new date from the Book of Revelation and the geometry of the Great Pyramid. Each failure seeded the next wave. NASA's top planetary scientist began receiving 5 emails a day about the planet, ranging from anguished to abusive. One line kept recurring in his inbox: "If NASA denies it, that proves it must be true." Here is the part that makes this strange. The more evidence astronomers gathered that no such planet exists, the more the belief calcified. The absence of the thing became its own proof. So what is happening here? And why does a long-dead planet hoax keep waking up? The first person to tie the panic to a specific object was not an astronomer. Anton Mortgat was an Assyriologist, a scholar of ancient Mesopotamian languages and texts, and in 1940 he published a catalogue of cylinder seals held in Berlin's Vorderasiatisches Museum. Cylinder seals are small stone cylinders, carved in intricate relief, that were rolled across wet clay to leave an impression, a kind of signature or official mark. One seal in the collection, catalogued VA243, showed a seated figure in a flounced robe, a standing attendant, and a field of stars. Above them, in the upper left, was a cluster, a 6-pointed star surrounded by 11 smaller dots. The inscription, which Mortgat transcribed, read Dubsiga ili ilat ir 3-su. Dubsiga ili ilat, your servant. It was a personal seal, the ancient equivalent of a business card. Mortgat published the image and moved on. 36 years later, Sitchin saw the photograph and read it differently. The central star, he said, was the sun. The 11 dots were planets. The familiar ones, plus Earth's moon, plus one more, undiscovered, that the Sumerians had somehow known about. He called it Nibiru, an Akkadian word meaning crossing or point of transition, and he said it orbited far beyond Pluto, swinging back into the inner solar system roughly every 3,600 years. The Sumerians knew about it, he argued, because beings from that planet, the Anunnaki, the gods of the old texts, had visited Earth, mined gold, and altered early hominids. The seal, he said, was their diagram of the solar system. The problem is that every part of that reading falls apart under scrutiny. The inscription says nothing about astronomy, it is a servant's name. The central figure is not the sun. Mesopotamian depictions of the sun god Shamash use a different, consistent iconography, and the 6- or 8-pointed star in VA243 does not match it. The dots are simply stars, a common decorative element. One scholar pointed out that if every star and dot cluster in Mesopotamian art were a solar system diagram, we would have hundreds of them, each with a different number of planets. Michael Heiser, a scholar who spent years tracing Sitchin's claims back to the original texts, noted that there is not a single cuneiform tablet in the entire corpus, tens of thousands of documents spanning 3 millennia, that tells us the Sumerians or Babylonians knew of more than 5 planets: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, the ones visible to the naked eye. The word Nibiru itself appears in genuine astronomical texts, and in those texts it refers to Jupiter, the brightest wandering star, or to a seasonal crossing point in the sky, not a hidden planet. In Tablet 5 of the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian account of how the cosmos came to be, the gods fix the locations of Nibiru, Enlil, and Ea in the sky as reference points, stationary markers for the calendar. Nibiru is described as a post, a turning point, something that does not move. Sitchin built an entire cosmology on a single ambiguous image and a personally derived etymology that no Assyriologist accepts. And yet the idea found an audience. By the mid-1990s, the book had sold millions. It planted the seed, but someone else set the date. Her name was Nancy Lieder, and in 1995 she launched a website called ZetaTalk. She said that as a child, beings from the Zeta Reticuli star system had implanted a communication device in her brain, and that they now sent her messages. The messages, she said, concerned a planet the Zetas called Planet X. It was not Sitchin's Nibiru exactly. Lieder described it as roughly 4 times Earth's diameter, accompanied by moons and a long tail of debris. But it was coming, and it would pass close enough to Earth to trigger a physical pole shift. The crust would slide over the mantle, oceans would slosh across continents, most of humanity would die. She set the date, May 2003. She also tied the claim to a visible event. In 1997, comet Hale Bopp was making its closest approach to the Sun, brilliant and naked eye visible for months. Lieder said an object, Planet X, trailed behind the comet, hidden in its glare. Astronomers found no such object. Hale Bopp came and went, and amateur observers around the world trained telescopes on the comet's tail and saw only the comet. Lieder revised the timeline. On May 16, 2003, she appeared on a radio show and said the Zetas had given a new date, May 27, 2003. When that day passed, she issued a statement. The date, she said, had been a white lie, a deliberate deception told to protect the public from the government's plans to declare martial law and seize control in the final days. The real passage, she now said, had already occurred. Planet X had arrived, but it was motionless, sitting behind the Sun, invisible from Earth. The claim was geometrically impossible. An object directly behind the Sun from Earth's perspective would be visible from anywhere else in Earth's orbit 6 months later, or from any observer in the southern hemisphere at any time. But the revision worked. The belief did not collapse, it mutated. The website remained active. A forum grew around it. The Leavers debated the details, reinterpreted sky events, and waited for the next sign. The prediction had failed, but the predictor had not lost her audience. She had kept it by saying the failure itself was part of the plan. This is where the panic became strange. In 1956, 3 psychologists, Leon Festinger, Henry Rieken, and Stanley Schachter, published a book called When Prophecy Fails. They had infiltrated a small UFO group in Chicago led by a woman named Dorothy Martin, who predicted a great flood and a rescue by flying saucer. When the saucer did not come, Festinger expected the group to disband. Instead, the most committed members doubled down. They intensified their efforts to recruit new believers, reinterpreted the failure as a test, and found new meaning in the fact that the disaster had not occurred. Perhaps their faith had staved it off. Festinger called this cognitive dissonance, the psychological discomfort of holding contradictory beliefs, and proposed that under certain conditions, deep conviction, public commitment, a precise and falsifiable claim, clear disconfirmation, and social support, a failed prophecy strengthens belief rather than destroying it. The book became a foundational text in social psychology. It explained Heaven's Gate, the UFO cult that committed mass suicide in 1997, believing a spacecraft trailed comet Hale Bopp. It explained the Seekers. It seemed to explain ZetaTalk. But here is the uncomfortable part. A historian named Thomas Kelly spent years in the archives, and in 2026 published an article arguing that the central claim of when prophecy fails is not true. He says the Seekers were already proselytizing before the failed prophecy, not after. That most members abandoned the group within weeks, and that the researchers themselves fabricated messages, manipulated events, and misrepresented what they observed. One of the authors later admitted he had precipitated key moments. Kelly's findings are contested, and the debate is unresolved. But they suggest that the classic story of belief persisting through disconfirmation may be as constructed as the beliefs it describes. Whether or not the original study holds, the pattern it claimed to describe shows up everywhere in the Nibiru story. Leader's white lie kept her audience, and when 2003 faded, the belief found a new date. The Maya long count is a calendar system used in pre-Columbian Mesoamerica that counts days from a mythological starting point, August 11th, 3114 BCE, in the proleptic Gregorian calendar. It is divided into cycles called baktuns, each lasting roughly 394 years. On December 21st, 2012, the 13th baktun ended and the calendar rolled over to the next cycle. That is all. It is a calendrical milestone, not a prophecy. David Stewart, a Maya epigrapher at the University of Texas, said plainly, "The Maya never said the world is going to end. They never said anything bad would happen. They are just recording this future anniversary on a monument." Mark Van Stone, who wrote an entire book on 2012, noted that end-of-world prophecies are born from our current society, with little basis in what is known about the Maya. The calendar resets the way an odometer clicks past 99,999.9 miles back to zero. But in the years leading up to 2012, the date became a container for every available apocalypse theory. Nibiru was chief among them. Internet forums, YouTube channels, documentaries, and talk radio shows all asked the same question. What if the Maya knew about Planet X? The conflation made no sense. The Maya counted time, Sitchin invented a planet, and Leader channeled beings from another star system. But the date was too vivid to resist. NASA received so many inquiries that it published a dedicated FAQ and a series of videos. The agency's lead respondent, a planetary scientist named David Morrison, became something close to a public defender of basic astronomy. He had joined NASA in 1976, the same year Sitchin published The 12th Planet. By 2009, he was receiving roughly 5 questions a day about Nibiru. By late 2012, that had grown to more than 5,000 questions, with over 400 written answers archived on the Ask an Astrobiologist site. The questions ranged in tone. Some were genuine and frightened. "I cannot sleep. I am scared. I do not want to die." Others were hostile. "Why are you lying? You are putting my family at risk. If NASA denies it, then it must be true." The pattern Morrison kept seeing was a closed loop. Any evidence offered against the planet's existence was reinterpreted as evidence of a cover-up. The absence of the object became proof that someone was hiding it. Morrison offered a series of simple rebuttals. First, orbital mechanics. Any large planet that swings through the inner solar system every few thousand years would gravitationally perturb the orbits of the planets already here. Earth's orbit would become elliptical. The Moon would be stripped away. Venus and Mars would be thrown off course. None of that has happened. Second, visibility. An inbound planet would be among the brightest objects in the sky months before any close approach. Go outside and look. It is not there. Third, detection. Tens of thousands of amateur astronomers scan the sky every night. Professional surveys map the entire sky repeatedly. An object on the scale required would have been catalogued long ago, and even if one government tried to suppress it, the global amateur community could not be silenced. You do not hide a planet on its way into the inner solar system. But Morrison also noticed that the request for explanation was itself a trap. In a 2017 interview, he said, "You are asking me for a logical explanation of a totally illogical idea. There is no such planet, there never has been, and presumably there never will be, but it keeps popping up over and over." December 21, 2012 came and went. No planet appeared. The predictions moved again. In 2017, a Christian numerologist named David Meade revived the prophecy with a new source text, the Bible. He wrote a book called Planet X, the 2017 Arrival, and pointed to Revelation 12, verses 1 and 2. A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. Meade said this described a rare celestial alignment on September 23, 2017. On that date, the sun would be in the constellation Virgo, the Virgin, the woman, and the moon near her feet. Jupiter, which had been in Virgo's womb for 9 months, would exit the constellation. Meade called this the Great Sign and said it heralded the start of a 7-year tribulation and the arrival of Nibiru. He also incorporated the geometry of the Great Pyramid of Giza and argued that the number 33 recurred in prophetic contexts, making September 23 a date with deep numerological weight, the likeliest trigger. Astronomers pointed out that the configuration Meade described happens roughly once a decade and is not unique. The claim rested on a selective reading of where constellation boundaries are drawn and which planets count as the crown. September 23 passed. Meade then said he had never claimed anything would happen on that specific day. He shifted the timeline to October 15th, then to November 19th, then to April 23, 2018. Each time, a subset of the audience followed the revision, and a new layer of explanation preserved the core belief. The tabloid coverage eventually stopped naming Meade and simply referred to Nibiru theorists. The claim had become larger than its source. What kept the belief alive, in part, was a real scientific precedent. In 1846, astronomers discovered Neptune by predicting its location from gravitational anomalies in the orbit of Uranus. The math said a planet must be there, and when telescopes turned to that part of the sky, it was. In 1906, Percival Lowell began searching for another planet, Planet X, to explain further irregularities in the orbits of Uranus and Neptune. He never found it. After his death in 1916, the search continued at Lowell Observatory, and in 1930 a young astronomer named Clyde Tombaugh discovered Pluto. It appeared to be in roughly the right region, and for decades it was hailed as the predicted 9th planet. But in 1978, James Christie discovered Pluto's moon Charon, and for the first time Pluto's mass could be directly calculated. It was tiny, about 1/500th the mass of Earth, far too small to perturb the gas giants. Then, in 1989, Voyager 2 flew past Neptune and sent back data that revised Neptune's mass downward. When astronomers recalculated the orbits with the corrected mass, the anomalies vanished. There had never been a real need for Planet X. The predicted perturbations were artifacts of a wrong mass estimate. Pluto was a coincidence. But the precedent stuck in popular memory. Believers in Nibiru often begin by pointing to Neptune. We have found hidden planets before by inference. Why not again? The question is fair. In January 2016, 2 astronomers, Konstantin Batygin and Michael Brown at Caltech, published a paper in the Astronomical Journal presenting evidence for a real undiscovered planet in the outer solar system. They called it Planet 9. The evidence was not a photograph or a direct detection. It was a pattern. They had been studying a class of objects called extreme trans-Neptunian objects, or ETNOs, small icy bodies with orbits that swing far beyond Neptune. 6 of these objects had orbital elements that clustered in an unusual way. Their perihelia, the points of closest approach to the Sun, all pointed in roughly the same direction, and their orbital planes were tilted similarly. Batygin and Brown calculated the probability that this clustering occurred by chance. The result was 0.007%, or about 1 in 14,000. Something was shaping those orbits, and the most plausible explanation was gravitational shepherding by an unseen planet. Their model suggested a planet roughly 5 to 10 times the mass of Earth, on a highly elliptical orbit with a semi-major axis around 400 to 800 astronomical units, 400 to 800 times the distance from the Earth to the Sun. For context, Pluto orbits at about 40 astronomical units, and its most distant point is around 49. Planet 9, if it exists, is out beyond anything we have directly observed, moving slowly through a region of sky so large and so faint that even modern surveys struggle to cover it completely. The prediction was based on solid mechanics and published in a peer-reviewed journal. It reignited interest in the outer solar system and launched a coordinated search using the world's best telescopes. It also triggered an immediate wave of headlines conflating Planet 9 with Nibiru. Brown, who is active on social media and has a dry sense of humor, responded directly. On April 6, 2016, he posted, PSA, Planet 9 is not Planet X or Nibiru or Nemesis. All theories of a planet out there are not the same theory. The next day he added, Planet 9 is not going to cause the Earth's destruction. If you read that it will, you have discovered idiotic writing. The distinction matters. Planet 9, if it exists, sits hundreds of astronomical units away, far beyond any orbital interaction with Earth, and poses zero threat. Its orbit does not bring it into the inner solar system. It is not on a collision course, and despite the headlines, it has not been found. Here is where the story sits as of 2026. The search for Planet 9 is still active. In June 2025, the Vera C. Rubin Observatory in Chile released its first images. The observatory, formerly called the Large Synoptic Survey Telescope, is built to map the entire visible sky every few nights, reaching unprecedented depth and coverage. If Planet 9 exists and is bright enough, Rubin should find it within a few years. Brown said in November 2024, if we find something moving out around 500 to 600 astronomical units, it will be Planet 9. In April 2025, he called it the 5th largest planet in our solar system, lurking out there, waiting to be found. Batygin, in a June 2026 interview, said that the Rubin Observatory would likely settle the question one way or another within the year. But he also acknowledged uncertainty. He noted that if Planet 9 turns out to be a bare, dark rock rather than a gas giant with a warm interior, it could be much harder to detect. In his words, undeniably, that would suck. But that might be the reality of it. We will get what we will get, and we will not get upset. In July 2025, another discovery complicated the picture. A team using the Subaru telescope in Hawaii announced the discovery of a 4th sednoid, an object on a distant, highly elliptical orbit similar to the previously known body Sedna. They named the new object 2023 KQ-14, informally called Ammonite. Its perihelion is around 71 astronomical units, far beyond Neptune, and its orbit is tilted and offset from the clustering that originally suggested Planet 9. The lead scientist, Yukun Huang, said, "The fact that 2023 KQ-14's current orbit does not align with those of the other 3 sednoids lowers the likelihood of the Planet 9 hypothesis." It is possible that a planet once existed in the solar system but was later ejected. The data is still being interpreted. Some researchers argue that the clustering is real and requires a planetary explanation. Others, including astronomer Samantha Lawler, suggest that the apparent clustering is an artifact of observational bias. We find objects where and when we look, and surveys naturally favor certain parts of the sky. A third hypothesis proposes that the orbits are sculpted not by a single planet, but by the self-gravity of a distant disk of debris, a collective effect rather than a lone giant. The debate is ongoing, and it is honest. This is how science is supposed to work: competing explanations, refined data, and a clear empirical test coming soon. Planet 9 is a hypothesis, not a fact, and Batygin and Brown are explicit about that. The interesting part is what happened before Rubin, before Planet 9, when the search was driven not by dynamical clustering, but by the possibility of a companion object to the Sun. In the early 1980s, two separate ideas gained traction. One was Nemesis, a hypothesized dim companion star, possibly a red or brown dwarf, in a long orbit around the Sun, proposed to explain an apparent periodicity in mass extinction events on Earth. The idea was that every 26 million years or so, Nemesis would swing through the Oort cloud, dislodge comets, and send a shower of impacts toward the inner planets. The other idea, floated slightly later, was Tyche, a distant gas giant that might explain some of the same orbital anomalies Lowell had chased a century earlier. Both ideas motivated surveys, especially in the infrared, where cold or faint objects shine most brightly. The first major survey was IRAS, the Infrared Astronomical Satellite, launched in January 1983 as a joint mission by the United States, the Netherlands, and the United Kingdom. IRAS was a 10-month mission. Its telescope was cooled by liquid helium, and when the helium ran out, the mission ended. In that short window, it surveyed about 96% of the sky and catalogued roughly 250,000 infrared sources. Late in the mission, in December 1983, a few objects were flagged as unidentified. The Washington Post ran a story headlined, "Mystery Heavenly Body Discovered." The article quoted the mission's chief scientist, Jerry Neugebauer, saying, "All I can tell you is that we don't know what it is." The article speculated about possibilities, including a planet, a distant galaxy, or nearby interstellar gas. The story was picked up widely. A year later, in 1984, follow-up analysis published in the Astrophysical Journal identified the mystery sources. They were distant galaxies, plus some infrared emission from intergalactic dust, what astronomers call cirrus. None were solar system objects. None were planets. Neugebauer himself had suggested in the original interview that the objects were likely distant galaxies, but that caveat was buried in later coverage. Believers in Nibiru still cite the 1983 headline and ignore the 1984 resolution. They treat the mystery as unresolved. In 2009, NASA launched a successor mission, WISE, the Wide Field Infrared Survey Explorer. WISE scanned the entire sky twice between 2010 and 2011 at wavelengths where cool or dim objects radiate most strongly. In 2014, Kevin Luhman at Penn State published a comprehensive search for distant solar system companions using WISE data. The results were definitive. WISE could rule out the existence of a Saturn mass object within about 28,000 astronomical units, a Jupiter mass object within 82,000 astronomical units, more than a light year, and a Jupiter mass brown dwarf within about 26,000 astronomical units. Luhman's conclusion was direct. The outer solar system probably does not contain a large gas giant planet or a small companion star. Follow-up archival work, published in 2022 as the Untimely Catalogue, pushed the analysis even deeper and extended the time baseline. The result is the same. No large, warm object is hiding out there. If Nibiru existed as described, large, inbound, and close, it would have been seen. The fact that it was not tells us it is not there. This does not rule out Planet 9. Planet 9 is predicted to be small, cold, dark, and hundreds of times farther out than Pluto, well beyond WISE's sensitivity for a Neptune or Earth mass object. WISE ruled out the Nibiru scenario and the Tyche/Nemesis scenarios. It did not rule out a distant, dim, rocky world at the outer edge of the Sun's gravitational reach, which is exactly what Batygin and Brown are proposing. There is a second line of argument believers use: the idea that the planet has already arrived but is being hidden. Some claim it is visible only from Antarctica, which is why NASA built the South Pole Telescope. The South Pole Telescope is real. It is a 10-meter radio dish that sits at the Amundsen Scott South Pole Station, operational since 2007. It observes the cosmic microwave background, the faint afterglow of the Big Bang, and it detects distant galaxy clusters through the Sunyaev-Zeldovich effect, a subtle distortion in the microwave sky caused by hot gas. It is part of the Event Horizon Telescope Array that imaged the black hole at the center of the galaxy M87. It is not an optical telescope, and it is not built to look at planets. It is in Antarctica because the air there is cold, dry, and stable. The atmospheric water vapor that absorbs microwave signals is frozen out, making the site one of the best on Earth for this kind of observation. The claim that it exists to track Nibiru appeared on YouTube in 2008 and has circulated ever since. It is false, and it is easily checked. The telescope's science papers are public, its observing programs are documented, and the instrument itself is not capable of the task it has been assigned in the conspiracy. There is no celestial object visible only from Antarctica. Anything in the southern sky is visible from the entire southern hemisphere. Anything bright is visible from anywhere. Believers also point to blacked-out regions in Google Sky, an online tool that stitches together astronomical survey images. Some regions are missing or blank in the interface, but these are data gaps where different surveys did not overlap or where image tiles were not processed for public display. They are artifacts of software, not evidence of censorship. Astronomers who work on these surveys can access the raw data directly and have found nothing hidden. Another recurring piece of evidence in believer communities is the phenomenon of two suns appearing in the sky, usually in photographs or videos. The images are real, but the explanation is mundane. Most cases are lens reflections. A phone camera or a flat filter in front of a lens can produce a secondary image of a bright light source offset from the original, especially if the glass or plastic is slightly tilted or dirty. The second image is dimmer, often colored differently, and moves in lockstep with camera motion, because it is a reflection inside the camera, not an object in the sky. Other cases are sundogs, also called parhelia. These are bright spots that appear on either side of the sun, roughly 22 degrees away, caused by sunlight refracting through hexagonal ice crystals in high, thin clouds. Sundogs are common, well understood, and sometimes bright enough to be mistaken for a second sun by someone unfamiliar with the phenomenon. A few images are outright fabrications, digitally edited or composited. Debunkers have traced several viral two-sun videos back to their original unedited versions, or have recreated the effect by tilting a pane of glass in front of a camera pointed at the sun. None require a second stellar object. The appeal of the two-sun image is visceral. It looks wrong, and wrongness feels like revelation. But photography is a process, not a window. It has artifacts, and light does things inside lenses that it does not do in the open air. A reflection is not a planet. Why does this matter? because millions of people have spent years of their lives preparing for an event that will not happen, and some of them have built entire economies around that preparation. A company called Vivos, run by a man named Robert Vicino, markets underground survival shelters. One of its flagship sites is X Point, a former military munitions storage facility in South Dakota that Vivos converted into 575 private bunkers. Early reports suggested the site could house around 5,000 people. Later marketing materials claimed up to 10,000. Each bunker is leased for a 99-year term, a $25,000 deposit, a $1,000 annual fee, and an additional $12,000 to $20,000 for custom interior fit-out. The company has reported that inquiries spiked by 2,000% year-over-year and sales by 300%, with single-day revenue reaching $1 million during the COVID-19 pandemic. These are company claims, not independently audited figures, but the broader market is real. Business Insider reported in 2023 that the global market for underground bunkers exceeds $23 billion and is projected to reach $36 billion by the end of the decade. Around 20 million Americans identify as preppers, and 4 in 10 American adults believe we are living in the end times. The shelter industry is not a fringe hobby. It is a multi-billion-dollar sector. Rising S Company in Texas and Atlas Survival Shelters are competitors in the same space. In 2019, a Rising S bunker in Red River County, Texas exploded. The cause was ruled to be pressure buildup from weather, but the incident highlighted the fact that these structures are being sold at scale, installed in remote locations, and occupied by families who believe they will need them. Some of these beliefs are grounded in plausible concerns: nuclear war, pandemic, economic collapse, climate-driven disaster. Others are rooted in the Nibiru prophecy and its descendants. The line between reasonable preparation and apocalyptic fixation is not always clear, but the market does not care. Fear is fungible. Here is what makes the Nibiru idea so durable. It is built like a self-sealing system. Every piece of evidence against it can be reinterpreted as evidence for a deeper layer of the conspiracy. NASA denies the planet exists? That is what NASA would say if it were covering it up. No astronomer has photographed it? They are all complicit, or they are being silenced, or the images are being suppressed. Orbital mechanics make the claimed orbit impossible. The physics must be wrong, or there is exotic physics we do not understand. The planet did not arrive on the predicted date. The date was never firm, or it is already here and hidden, or the disaster was delayed by human intervention, prayer, collective consciousness, whistleblowers forcing a delay. Each node of refutation becomes a node of confirmation. This is not a bug in the belief system, it is a feature. Philosopher Karl Popper called this unfalsifiability, a claim that cannot be tested, that absorbs all contradictory evidence and outputs the same conclusion, is not a scientific hypothesis. It is a closed interpretive loop. The problem is not that believers are stupid or irrational. Many of them are intelligent, thoughtful, and deeply informed about the claims they are evaluating. The problem is that the framework they are using does not have an exit condition. There is no piece of evidence that would, in principle, convince them the planet does not exist, because the absence of evidence has already been incorporated as part of the story. And when the framework offers a simple explanation for a complex, frightening world, you are being lied to, but we know the truth. The emotional pull is strong. It offers the feeling of seeing through the illusion, of being one of the few who understand what is happening. That feeling is real, even when the underlying claim is not. There is a deeper discomfort here. The Nibiru story began with a mistranslation of a Sumerian seal and a series of speculative claims about visitors from another world and genetic modification. But it found an audience because it tapped into something older. the intuition that the world is fragile and that catastrophe is always closer than we admit. Flood myths appear in dozens of cultures. The fear of the sky falling, of fire from above, of the earth opening up. These are ancient, and they are not irrational. The world has ended many times for many peoples. Asteroid impacts are real. The Chicxulub impactor, about 10 kilometers across, struck the Yucatan Peninsula 66 million years ago and ended the age of the dinosaurs. Smaller impacts have caused regional devastation within human history. The Tunguska event in 1908 flattened 2,000 square kilometers of Siberian forest. We now catalogue near-Earth asteroids precisely because the threat is real, and we have proposed, and in some cases tested, methods to deflect them. Volcanic supereruptions, like the Toba eruption 74,000 years ago, have caused global cooling and population bottlenecks. Solar flares and coronal mass ejections can disrupt power grids and communications. The Carrington event of 1859 induced currents strong enough to set telegraph equipment on fire. We live on a geologically active planet in a solar system that is not perfectly stable, and we have been catastrophically vulnerable for most of our history. The fear is not baseless. The problem with Nibiru is not that it names a fear. The problem is that it names the wrong object and assigns it certainty. It takes a legitimate uncertainty, we cannot predict every future disaster, and collapses it into a specific, vivid, datable event. And then, when the date passes, the fear does not disperse. It migrates. Think about what that does to the people who fully believe it. David Morrison documented this in his correspondence. One message read, "I cannot sleep. I am scared. I do not want to die." Another, "Why are you lying? You are putting my family at risk." If NASA denies it, then it must be true. These are not abstract philosophical positions. These are people who are terrified, and whose terror has been organized into a narrative that makes every authority figure an adversary. Morrison is not unique in receiving these messages. Every astronomer who has spoken publicly about Nibiru has encountered some version of the same desperation or hostility. And the consequences are real. There are documented cases of children expressing fear of imminent death in the weeks leading up to predicted doomsday dates. There are families who have relocated, spent life savings on bunkers or supplies, or severed relationships with people who would not join them in preparing. There is a human cost to a belief system that is built around inevitable catastrophe and institutional betrayal. The belief is not neutral. It leaves marks. In 2011, a woman in Russia reportedly considered killing her family and herself to avoid the suffering predicted for December 2012. Reports from China described underground shelter construction on a scale that prompted government intervention. In one case, a man named Lu Zhenghai spent his life savings building a survival ark, a spherical pod meant to withstand floods and earthquakes. He was not alone. The Chinese government eventually issued statements attempting to calm public panic and arrested individuals spreading doomsday rumors online. The fear crossed borders, languages, and education levels. It reached people who had never heard of Zecharia Sitchin or read a Sumerian text, because by the time it reached them, it had been stripped of its academic pretense and reduced to its core. Something is coming, no one will tell you, and you need to prepare. That message is portable. It does not require knowledge of orbital mechanics or Akkadian linguistics. It requires only distrust and fear, and both are abundant. The paradox at the center of all this is that the more scientists responded, the more the belief seemed to grow. Morrison's 5 emails a day became a steady stream that lasted more than a decade. NASA put up a 2012 FAQ page, a series of YouTube videos, and a dedicated section on its public outreach site. Morrison appeared on podcasts, wrote articles, and answered questions in forums. He was thorough, patient, and clear. He explained that a planet large enough to threaten Earth would be visible to the naked eye for months before any close approach. He explained that gravitational perturbations from an inbound object would have already disrupted the orbits of the planets, and that no such perturbations have been observed. He explained that the Maya never predicted the end of the world, and that the calendar simply rolled over to a new cycle, the way your car's odometer rolls over when it hits a certain mileage. He explained that IRAS found distant galaxies, not a hidden planet. He explained that WISE ruled out any large companion object within a light year of the Sun. He explained that tens of thousands of amateur astronomers observe the sky every night, and that a conspiracy involving every one of them, plus every professional observatory, every space agency, every government, was logistically impossible. He explained all of this, repeatedly, in language anyone could follow. And yet, the volume of questions did not decrease. In some cases, it increased. By Morrison's own account, the tone of the messages often framed his denial as confirmation. If NASA says it is not there, that proves it is. If scientists cannot see it, that means they are part of the cover-up or too blind to recognize the truth. This is the linguistic trap. Expertise becomes evidence of complicity, and silence and speech are interpreted identically. If NASA says nothing, they are hiding it. If NASA says it does not exist, they are lying. There is no statement a scientist can make that escapes reinterpretation within the framework. Consider the structure of the claim itself. Nibiru is described as being on a long elliptical orbit that brings it into the inner solar system roughly every 3,600 years. Using Kepler's third law, which relates the period of an orbit to its size, an orbit of 3,600 years corresponds to a semi-major axis of about 235 astronomical units. That means at its farthest point, the planet would be around 470 astronomical units from the Sun, nearly 10 times farther than Pluto at its most distant, well into the region where the Sun's light is so faint that it provides almost no warmth and only the dimmest illumination. At that distance, even a large planet would be extraordinarily difficult to detect in reflected sunlight. It would be cold, dark, and slow-moving against the background stars. This is why legitimate searches for distant planets like Planet 9 are so challenging. But here is the problem with the 3,600-year orbit. When such an object swings into the inner solar system near Earth's orbit at 1 astronomical unit, it would be traveling at roughly 42 kilometers per second. That velocity is essentially the escape velocity from the solar system at Earth's distance. Any gravitational interaction with another planet, Jupiter, Saturn, even Earth, would be enough to change its trajectory slightly, and that slight change would be enough to eject it from the solar system entirely. An orbit that reaches 470 astronomical units and dips to 1 astronomical unit is not stable over the long term. It is right at the edge of being unbound. The slightest perturbation would either send the object out in interstellar space or cause it to collide with something. An object cannot make hundreds or thousands of such passes without being thrown out. The 3,600-year return is dynamically implausible. This is not a matter of opinion or interpretation, it is a consequence of how gravity works. Astronomers know this because we have observed comets on similar orbits. Long-period comets that swing in from the outer reaches of the solar system, past the Sun, and head back out. Many of them are on hyperbolic or near-parabolic orbits, meaning they will never return. The solar system is losing them to interstellar space. The ones that do return have their orbits gradually altered by the gravity of the giant planets. Some are captured into shorter orbits, some are ejected. None stay on the same path indefinitely. A massive planet on a 3,600-year loop would face the same forces, but much more dramatically, because its own gravity would make it a target for every other massive body in the system. Here is where analogy helps. Picture a crowded highway at rush hour. Now imagine trying to drive a bus through that traffic at twice the speed limit, weaving between lanes, while blindfolded, over and over again, hundreds of times, and never hitting anything or being hit. Even if you made it through once, the odds of making it through a second time are lower. A third time, lower still. Eventually, the statistics catch up. Either you collide with something, or someone else's motion forces you off the road entirely. The solar system is not empty. Jupiter alone is 318 times the mass of Earth, and it sits at 5.2 astronomical units, right in the path any inbound object from the outer system would have to cross. Saturn is 95 Earth masses at 9.5 astronomical units. These are not small obstacles. They are gravitational giants, and anything passing near them gets deflected. The orbits of comets change measurably every time they pass through the inner system. A planet on the Nibiru trajectory would be subject to the same forces, scaled up. Konstantin Batygin, one of the scientists behind the Planet 9 hypothesis, addressed this directly when the Nibiru conflation started. He said, "If you are worried about Planet 9's gravity destroying things, I would encourage you to revisit the inverse square law of gravity. Gravity falls off with the square of the distance. Something at 400 or 500 astronomical units exerts almost no force on Earth. Something at 5 astronomical units, Jupiter's distance, exerts vastly more. If you are worried about Planet 9, you should worry about Jupiter. The point is that proximity matters enormously, and anything truly threatening would have to be close. A close planet is visible. A visible planet would have been seen. It has not been seen because it is not there. The infrared argument cuts even deeper. Every object above absolute zero radiates energy. The hotter the object, the more it radiates, and the shorter the peak wavelength of that radiation. The Sun, at nearly 6,000 degrees Celsius on its surface, peaks in visible light, the yellow-white glow we see. A planet like Earth, much cooler, radiates primarily in the infrared, wavelengths longer than visible light. A very cold object, like a distant icy body in the outer solar system, radiates in the far infrared, wavelengths so long that they are invisible to the human eye, but detectable by specialized instruments. This is described by two related laws: the Stefan-Boltzmann law, which tells you the total power radiated by an object of a given size and temperature, and Wien's displacement law, which tells you the wavelength at which the radiation peaks. Both laws are consequences of basic thermodynamics and have been tested exhaustively. They are not speculative. They are among the most reliable tools in astrophysics. When IRAS launched in 1983, it was built to see objects that are warm but not hot. Objects that glow in the infrared but not in visible light. Brown dwarfs, cool stars, dusty galaxies, and potentially large planets in the outer solar system all fit that description. IRAS surveyed 96% of the sky and found about 250,000 sources. The unidentified objects that made headlines in 1983 were resolved in 1984 as distant galaxies. No solar system objects were among them. When WISE launched in 2009, it had better sensitivity, better spatial resolution, and covered the entire sky multiple times. The 2014 analysis by Kevin Luhman used WISE data to place the tightest constraints ever on hidden planets. The exclusion distances, 28,000 astronomical units for a Saturn mass object, 82,000 for a Jupiter mass object, are not guesses. They are derived from the instrument's detection limits and the expected thermal emission of objects of various masses and temperatures at various distances. The conclusion is that if a large, warm object were out there, WISE would have seen it. It did not see it, so it is not there. This does not mean the outer solar system is fully mapped. It means the outer solar system does not contain a large, relatively warm, nearby intruder. A small, cold, distant planet like the hypothesized Planet 9 could still be hiding, because its thermal signature would be too faint for WISE to detect at the predicted distance. But that is a very different object from the Nibiru of the prophecy, a massive, inbound, catastrophically close planet. That version is ruled out. There is also the question of what happens to the Moon. The Moon orbits Earth at an average distance of about 384,000 kilometers, held in place by Earth's gravity. But that grip is not infinitely strong. If another massive object passed close to the Earth-Moon system, its gravity would pull on both bodies. Because tidal forces, the difference in gravitational pull across an extended object, scale with the inverse cube of distance, a close flyby by a planet-sized intruder would generate enormous tidal stresses. The Moon could be torn from Earth's orbit and sent spinning off into space, captured by the intruder, or pulled into a collision course with Earth itself. This is not speculative drama. It is a direct consequence of the equations that govern tidal forces and orbital stability. Astronomers call the boundary within which a moon is torn apart by tidal forces the Roche limit, and the principle applies to any system where a smaller body orbits a larger one in the presence of a third, perturbing mass. If Nibiru had passed through the inner solar system even once in the last few thousand years, the moon would not be where it is. Lunar laser ranging experiments, in which scientists bounce laser beams off reflectors left on the moon by the Apollo missions, have measured the moon's distance to the millimeter and tracked its orbit over decades. The moon is receding from Earth at about 3.8 centimeters per year due to tidal interactions, a slow and predictable process. There is no sign of recent perturbation. The moon's orbit is stable and well understood, and that stability is powerful evidence against any recent massive intruder. The same argument applies to the orbits of the planets themselves. Earth's orbit is nearly circular, with an eccentricity of about 0.017, and it has been stable for millions of years. If a massive planet had passed through the inner solar system within recorded history, Earth's orbit would show the scars. It does not. Venus and Mars, the neighboring planets, also have stable, well-characterized orbits. None of them show evidence of recent gravitational disruption. But the belief does not rely on orbital mechanics or thermal emission. It relies on narrative, and narratives are built on moments that feel true even when the facts are false. Consider the moment in 1983 when the Washington Post ran the headline about the mystery heavenly body discovered by IRAS. That headline is real. The article is real. The quote from Jerry Neugebauer, "All I can tell you is that we don't know what it is real." That moment of genuine scientific uncertainty is the foundation of the Nibiru story as it exists today, and the fact that the uncertainty was resolved a year later does not erase the emotional weight of the original headline. For someone encountering the story decades after the fact, the headline is what sticks. The resolution is buried in a follow-up paper in a technical journal that most people will never read. The narrative is, scientists found something, didn't know what it was, and then stopped talking about it. The simpler explanation, they figured it out and it was not interesting, is less compelling than the hidden explanation, they figured it out, it was terrifying, and they covered it up. This is not a flaw in how people think. It is how storytelling works. Stories need tension, mystery, and stakes. A mystery that is solved and turns out to be mundane is narratively unsatisfying. A mystery that is solved but suppressed is dramatically perfect. And so the story that survives in popular memory is not the one supported by the data, it is the one that feels right. There is a term for this in psychology, the availability heuristic. It describes the tendency to judge the likelihood of an event based on how easily examples come to mind, rather than on statistical frequency. Plane crashes are rare, but they are vivid and widely covered, so people overestimate the danger of flying. Shark attacks are extraordinarily rare, but they are memorable, so people overestimate the danger of swimming in the ocean. The availability heuristic explains why a single dramatic headline can outweigh a decade of follow-up analysis. It is easier to remember the mystery than the resolution, easier to recall the alarming possibility than the mundane conclusion. And when the mystery involves government agencies, space, and existential threat, it is easy to see how the heuristic amplifies the belief. Every vivid image, a blacked-out region of Google sky, a strange second light in a photograph, a documentary with ominous music and dramatic narration, feeds the availability heuristic. Every measured scientific rebuttal, no matter how accurate, is abstract and dry by comparison. The narrative has an unfair advantage. Now layer onto that the real context of institutional distrust. The Nibiru belief did not emerge in a vacuum. It spread in a media environment where trust in institutions, governments, scientists, journalists, was already eroding. It spread alongside other conspiracy theories, that the moon landings were faked, that vaccines cause harm and are being pushed by corrupt pharmaceutical companies, that climate change is a hoax or a plot, that elections are rigged, that intelligence agencies orchestrate domestic events to justify wars or curtail freedoms. Some of these claims have kernels of documented truth. The Tuskegee syphilis experiment, in which black men were deliberately left untreated to study the progression of the disease, was real and ran for 40 years. The CIA's MK-Ultra program, which tested mind control techniques including involuntary administration of LSD, was real. The tobacco industry spent decades denying the health effects of smoking and funding fake research to muddy the science. The fossil fuel industry did the same with climate change. These are not theories, they are documented historical facts. They establish the precedent that institutions do lie, do cover up harm, and do prioritize their own interests over public welfare. Against that backdrop, the claim that NASA is hiding a planet does not sound absurd. It sounds plausible. It sounds like the kind of thing institutions do. The problem is that plausibility is not evidence. The precedent that some conspiracies are real does not mean every claimed conspiracy is real. The task of sorting the real from the false requires evidence, not just pattern matching, and that task becomes harder when the baseline trust is low. When someone says, NASA is lying, and your prior belief is that institutions frequently lie, the claim passes a plausibility filter it might not pass otherwise. This is not irrationality. It is a reasonable heuristic applied to the wrong case. The solution is not to dismiss the heuristic. Institutional skepticism is often warranted, but to insist on evidence for each specific claim. And on the specific claim of Nibiru, the evidence is uniformly negative. Let's return to the Planet 9 hypothesis, because it is worth understanding what a real scientific search for a distant planet looks like and how it differs from the Nibiru narrative. Batygin and Brown did not start with a prophecy or a hunch. They started with data, the orbital elements of 6 extreme trans-Neptunian objects, published by other astronomers over the course of a decade. These objects, Sedna, 2012 VP113, and 4 others, have orbits that are strange in specific, quantifiable ways. Their longitudes of perihelion, the angles that describe where their closest approach to the Sun occurs, cluster within about 30 degrees of one another. Their orbital planes are tilted relative to the plane of the solar system, and those tilts are also clustered. Batygin and Brown asked, what is the probability that this clustering happened by chance? They ran simulations. They calculated the expected distribution of orientations if the objects were randomly scattered by Neptune or by the collective gravity of the Kuiper belt. The result was that the observed clustering was unlikely to occur naturally. The probability was about 0.007%, or 7 in 100,000. That is not proof, but it is significant enough to warrant further investigation. They then asked, what kind of object could produce this clustering? They tested different scenarios. A passing star? Possible, but the timing and trajectory would have to be very specific. A distant disk of debris exerting collective gravity? Possibly, but the disk would have to be massive and precisely configured. A single distant planet? That worked. The planet would have to be about 5 to 10 Earth masses, on an eccentric orbit tilted relative to the plane of the solar system, with a semi-major axis of several hundred astronomical units. Its gravity would shepherd the smaller objects into the observed configuration over millions of years. The model made specific, testable predictions. It predicted the existence of objects on orbits perpendicular to the plane of the solar system, and within a year, such objects were found. It predicted the rough location in the sky where the planet should be, based on the current phase of its orbit. That is where the search is now focused. This is how science works when it is working properly. You observe a pattern. You ask what could cause it. You build models and test them against the data. You make predictions and check whether new observations match those predictions. You publish your work so others can scrutinize it, replicate your analysis, or find flaws in your reasoning. You remain uncertain and update your beliefs as new data comes in. Batygin and Brown have done all of this. They published in a peer-reviewed journal. They have given talks, answered questions, and engaged with critics. Other teams have analyzed the same data and reached different conclusions. Some support the Planet 9 hypothesis. Others argue the clustering is a selection effect. Others propose alternative mechanisms. The debate is ongoing, the models are being refined, and the search continues. That is the scientific process. It is messy, iterative, and provisional. It is also transparent. The data, the methods, and the reasoning are all public. Compare that to the Nibiru narrative. There is no data. There is a photograph of a cylinder seal, misread. There is a claimed communication from beings from another star system, unverifiable. There are prophecies tied to dates that pass without incident, followed by revised dates. There is no testable model, no peer review, no mechanism by which the claim could be proven false. The two approaches are not equivalent. One is science, the other is mythology. The fact that they both involve a distant planet does not make them the same. Now consider the 2025 discovery of the fourth sednoid, 2023 KQ14, nicknamed Ammonite. Sedna, the first of these objects, was discovered in 2003 by Mike Brown, the same astronomer now searching for Planet 9. Sedna's orbit is bizarre. Its closest approach to the Sun, its perihelion, is about 76 astronomical units, well beyond Neptune's orbit at 30 astronomical units, and even beyond the Kuiper belt. Its aphelion, the farthest point, is estimated at over 900 astronomical units. The orbit takes roughly 11,400 years to complete. Sedna is not alone. 3 more objects with similarly distant perihelia have been found: 2012 VP113, 2015 TG387, and now 2023 KQ14. These are called sednoids, and they are interesting because their orbits cannot be easily explained by Neptune's gravity alone. Neptune could not have placed them where they are. Something else must have. The Planet 9 hypothesis offers one explanation. A distant planet's gravity nudged them outward. But the discovery of Ammonite complicates the picture. Unlike the other 3 sednoids, Ammonite's orbit does not align with the clustering Batygin and Brown identified. Its orbital plane is tilted differently. Its longitude of perihelion points in a different direction. Yukun Huang, the lead scientist on the discovery team, said this lowers the likelihood of the Planet 9 hypothesis. If Planet 9 were the sole sculptor of these orbits, you would expect all of them to align. The fact that they do not suggests either that Planet 9 does not exist, or that it is one of several factors shaping the outer solar system, or that observational bias is playing a larger role than initially thought. This is not a failure of science. It is science working. A prediction was made, new data came in. The data partially contradicts the prediction. The model must now be revised or abandoned. Batygin and Brown have acknowledged this. Brown has said that if the Rubin Observatory completes its survey and finds nothing, they will accept that Planet 9 does not exist and explore other explanations. That is intellectual honesty. That is how you update beliefs in the face of evidence. The Nibiru narrative does not do this. It does not update. It does not incorporate negative evidence. It absorbs contradiction and continues. Let's talk about what it would look like if a planet were approaching. This is not speculative. It is straightforward celestial mechanics and observational astronomy. Any object in the solar system reflects sunlight. The amount of light it reflects depends on its size, its distance from the sun, and its reflectivity, or albedo. A large, bright object close to the sun reflects more light than a small, dark object far from the sun. The brightness we observe from Earth depends on the object's distance from both the sun and Earth, and it follows an inverse square law. Double the distance, and the brightness drops by a factor of 4. Astronomers measure brightness in magnitudes, a logarithmic scale where lower numbers mean brighter objects. The sun is magnitude -27. The full moon is magnitude -13. Venus, at its brightest, is magnitude -4.6. The faintest stars visible to the naked eye under dark skies are around magnitude 6. The faintest objects visible to large telescopes are around magnitude 30, more than 100 million times fainter than the naked eye limit. Now consider a hypothetical planet on an inbound trajectory. Let's say it is Neptune-sized, about 4 times the diameter of Earth, and it is approaching from a distance of 50 astronomical units, roughly Pluto's average distance. At that distance, it would be faint but detectable by large telescopes. As it moved closer, it would brighten. By the time it reached 10 astronomical units, roughly Saturn's distance, it would be visible to modest backyard telescopes. By 5 astronomical units, Jupiter's distance, it would be naked eye visible as a faint star. By 2 astronomical units, it would be one of the brightest objects in the night sky. And by 1 astronomical unit, Earth's distance from the Sun, it would be unmistakable, as bright as Venus, moving visibly against the stars over the course of hours or days. This is not optional. This is not something that could be hidden. Brightness is not a matter of opinion, it is a calculable quantity. An object the size claimed for Nibiru, at the distance and speed required to threaten Earth, would be blindingly obvious for months before any close approach. It would be visible from every continent. Tens of thousands of amateur astronomers would see it. Professional observatories would track it. Smartphone apps that identify stars and planets would flag it. It could not be missed, and it could not be suppressed. Morrison made this argument repeatedly. In one of his clearest statements, he said, "Even if it wanted to, the government could not keep Nibiru a secret. If Nibiru were real, it would be tracked by thousands of astronomers, amateurs as well as professionals. These scientists are spread all over the world. I know the astronomy community, and these scientists would not keep a secret even if ordered to. You just cannot hide a planet on its way into the inner solar system." This is not an assertion of trust in institutions, it is an assertion about the structure of the problem. A secret that depends on tens of thousands of independent actors, many of them with no connection to any government, staying silent despite having direct observational access to the phenomenon, is not a plausible secret. It is not a question of character or loyalty, it is a question of coordination. Secrets are hard to keep when only a handful of people know them. They are impossible to keep when thousands of people can verify or contradict them with a telescope and a clear night. And yet the conspiracy framing persists, because the conspiracy framing has an answer to this. The answer is, all of them are complicit, or all of them are being controlled, or all of them are too indoctrinated to see the truth. This moves the claim into a domain where it cannot be tested. If every astronomer is complicit, then the testimony of astronomers is irrelevant. If every observation that contradicts the claim is dismissed as fabricated or coerced, then no observation can refute the claim. The belief becomes unfalsifiable, and unfalsifiable claims are not science, they are faith. There is one more layer to this. Even if we set aside every objection, the orbital instability, the lack of perturbations, the absence of infrared signatures, the visibility arguments, the testimony of every astronomer, there is still the question of why. Why would anyone cover it up? The usual answer is to prevent panic. The logic is that if people knew a planet-killing object were approaching, society would collapse into chaos. So governments and scientists have agreed to keep it secret to maintain order until the end. But this logic has a fatal flaw. If the goal is to prevent panic, the cover-up is already failing. Millions of people believe the planet is coming. They are afraid. They are preparing. They are buying bunkers, stockpiling supplies, and in some cases, harming themselves or their families. The panic the cover-up is supposed to prevent is already happening, and it is happening precisely because of the cover-up narrative. If the goal were genuinely to minimize harm, the rational move would be transparency. Acknowledge the threat if it existed, explain the timeline, coordinate a global response, and give people accurate information so they could make informed decisions. A cover-up that leaks generates the worst of both worlds: widespread fear without coordinated action. And if the object is truly unstoppable, if there is no hope of survival or mitigation, then the cover-up serves no one. The secret would come out the moment the object became visible, and at that point, the trust necessary to coordinate any response would be gone. The cover-up does not make sense even on its own terms. It is a narrative device, not a strategy. Let's go back to the genuine question. Why do extreme trans-Neptunian objects cluster? This is a real mystery, and it is still open. Batygin and Brown proposed Planet 9 as an explanation, but other astronomers have challenged the interpretation. One major critique comes from surveys themselves. Finding distant objects is hard. They are faint, they move slowly, and they are spread across a huge area of sky. Surveys do not cover the sky uniformly. They focus on regions where conditions are favorable, away from the Milky Way's dense star fields, away from the bright zodiacal light near the ecliptic, and during times of year when those regions are well placed. This generates observational bias. If most of the discoveries happen to come from surveys that looked in a particular part of the sky, the apparent clustering could be an artifact of where we looked, not a reflection of the true distribution. Astronomer Samantha Lawler and others have argued that when you account for survey bias, the clustering is much less significant. They point out that the number of known objects is still small, fewer than a dozen with the relevant orbital characteristics, and small number statistics are notoriously unreliable. It is like flipping a coin 4 times, getting 3 heads, and concluding the coin is biased. Maybe it is, or maybe you just got a streak. You need more flips to know. The Rubin Observatory will provide those extra flips. It will survey the entire visible sky repeatedly, reaching much fainter magnitudes than previous surveys, and it will find many more distant objects. If the clustering is real, it will persist and become even more obvious. If it is a selection effect, it will dissolve as the sample grows. This is a testable question, and the test is happening now. The answer is not yet in. There is another proposed explanation, that the sednoids were placed on their current orbits not by a distant planet, but by a passing star. Stars are not fixed in space. They orbit the center of the galaxy, and occasionally one passes relatively close to the solar system. A close pass, say within a few thousand astronomical units, could gravitationally stir the outer solar system, flinging some objects outward and leaving others on the kinds of orbits we see today. This is not pure speculation. We know that the Sun formed in a stellar nursery, a cluster of stars born from the same molecular cloud, and we know that such clusters eventually disperse as the stars drift apart. We also know that the Sun has passed through regions of the galaxy with higher stellar density. A stellar encounter in the distant past could have left fingerprints in the architecture of the outer solar system. This explanation does not require an unseen planet. It requires only time and chance. The problem with the passing star explanation is that it is hard to test. We cannot rewind the orbits of nearby stars and check whether any came close enough in the last few 100 million years. We can model the likelihood, but we cannot observe it directly. The planet explanation, by contrast, is testable. If Planet 9 exists, it is still there and we can find it. If it does not exist, that is also an answer, and it will force us to reconsider how the outer solar system formed and evolved. Either way, the science moves forward. Here is why this matters. The Nibiru story and the Planet 9 hypothesis are often conflated, but they are opposites in almost every way. Nibiru is based on a misreading, propagated through prophecy and resistant to evidence. Planet 9 is based on an observed statistical anomaly, tested through models, and explicitly built to be falsifiable. Nibiru predicts catastrophe and demands belief. Planet 9 predicts an object that may or may not exist and invites verification. The two are not equivalent, and treating them as equivalent does a disservice to both the people who are genuinely afraid of Nibiru and the scientists who are genuinely searching for distant planets. Mike Brown has been explicit about this. In April 2016, just months after the Planet 9 paper was published, he tweeted, "PSA, Planet 9 is not Planet X or Nibiru or Nemesis. All theories of a planet out there are not the same theory." The next day he added, "Hey, so, fun fact? Planet 9 is not going to cause the Earth's destruction. If you read that it will, you have discovered idiotic writing." Brown is not dismissing the fear. He is trying to redirect it toward accuracy. Planet 9, if it exists, sits at hundreds of astronomical units. It exerts almost no gravitational influence on Earth. It does not threaten us. Batygin reinforced this in his 2026 interview. He pointed out that gravity weakens with the square of the distance, and that Jupiter, at 5 astronomical units, is vastly closer and more massive than Planet 9 could ever be. If Planet 9 were dangerous, Jupiter would be catastrophic. Jupiter is not catastrophic. It is one of the reasons Earth is habitable. Its gravity deflects many long-period comets that might otherwise strike the inner planets. It acts as a shield. Planet 9, if it is out there, is too far away and too small to matter to us on human timescales. The distinction matters, and it is lost when the two ideas are conflated. So where does that leave us? The Nibiru cataclysm is not real. It has never been real. It is built on a mistranslation, sustained by a series of failed prophecies, and perpetuated by a narrative structure that makes it immune to refutation. The object it predicts does not exist. The orbital mechanics are impossible. The infrared surveys have ruled it out. The perturbations it would cause are absent. The visibility it would require is not observed. Every piece of positive evidence offered for it has been debunked, and the debunking is itself reinterpreted as part of the conspiracy. It is not a scientific claim. It is a story, and it is a story that has caused real harm. But the fear it taps into, the fear that the world is fragile, that disaster is always possible, that we are vulnerable and often lied to, that fear is not irrational. The world is fragile. Disasters happen. Institutions do lie. The problem is not the fear itself, but where the fear is directed. A planet that does not exist cannot hurt you, but the belief in that planet can. It can cost you your savings, your relationships, your peace of mind. It can cost your children their sense of safety. It can leave you trapped in a framework where every denial is confirmation and every piece of evidence against the belief is reframed as evidence for a deeper conspiracy. That is the real danger. Not a hidden planet, but a hidden logic that makes escape impossible. There is a way out, but it requires something that is genuinely hard: the willingness to sit with uncertainty without filling it with certainty, and the willingness to trust evidence even when the story is less compelling than the alternative. The Maya did not predict the end. Sitchin misread a seal. Leaders' beings from another star system did not arrive. Mead's date passed. The next date will pass too, and when it does, there will be another date, because that is what this story does. It migrates, it adapts. It survives not because it is true, but because it is built to survive. The question is not whether the planet is coming. The question is whether we can recognize the difference between a claim that is built to be tested and a claim that is built to be believed. That is the real test, and it is one we can pass. Stay curious.